welcome to the Torras AI podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, the CEO and founder of Canary Speech, Henry O'Connell. With a background in biochemistry from the University of Connecticut, Henry has led multiple technology firms, including Medisize and Moxtech. At Canary Speech, he's pioneering the use of speech and language technology to identify health conditions. Henry, thank you so much for being here with us.
It's a delight to be here with you, and I thank you for the opportunity. You can probably tell I took the day at home today, which is rare, but it gives us kind of the opportunity to talk about the subject matter and to do it informally.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Kind of a relaxed, it's Friday,
Mhm.
working from home. Absolutely. That's the perfect atmosphere to have this conversation. So, Henry, what is the story behind the Canary Speech?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, for me, because it's part of my personal life, and during the last 45 years, I have had a friend, Jeff Adams, and Jeff and I met 45 years ago. I was at the National Institutes of Health doing research in neurological diseases. Jeff was working for the NSA at the time, which has become public over the years, and he was building mathematical models to de-encrypt spy messages. Now, 45 years ago, even the fundamentals and basics of speech that we know today, natural language processing, didn't exist. And Jeff was predated that in building these algorithms that could manipulate voice samples that were going back and forth during the Cold War. That became foundational to the new development of speech and language tech. Both of us left those government careers and we went on to careers in business. And Jeff went from there to work with a gentleman named Ray Kurzweil.
Mm-hmm.
And Ray was just a famous American scientist, was trying to develop the first commercially available NLP. Brilliant man, but Jeff had the particular skill sets and his experience within the allowed him to lead a team that built the first natural language processing capabilities, and they commercialized that. He went on to build Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a product that and company which is now owned by Microsoft.
Yeah, it was Dragon. It was very famous. It was almost a standard back in the days. Yes.
Microsoft bought it about 3 years ago for about $16.5 billion. And
There we go.
Jeff left it 100 years ago. So he went on to a company, developed speech to text that we use on our cell phones. He developed medical dictation and legal dictation software, did many, many different things. But about 15 years ago, right around that time, Amazon was looking for a team to build the product we now know as the Alexa product, the Amazon Echo. And they bought the company Jeff was in. And so they got Jeff and they got a group of speech and language scientists, 17 of them, which was probably the largest assembly of speech and language people in any company on the planet at the time. And they got Jeff O'Neill, who was a PhD in machine learning and a patent lawyer. This is kind of this gradual story up to 15 years ago. 3 years after that, Jeff and the team launched the Amazon Echo. And about a year after that, about 8 years ago or so, Jeff and I were in a bagel shop in Provo, Utah, and we were talking about, we had been friends all our lives, and we'd been talking about what could we do and could we do something together. And ultimately, that was a decision to create Canary Speech.
Nice.
We wanted to apply sub-language elements, the analysis of vocal biomarkers, to the identification of human condition and disease. And there had been 25 years of work, but they had centered on using natural language processing, the analysis of words to identify diseases. And there just is inherently not enough data. We look at 15.5 million data elements a minute. The average individual speaks about 150 words a minute. And even if you use syllables and spaces and filler words, you end up with a data set of 500 or 600 in a minute. And machine learning wants millions of data points. And so our
Yes.
approach suited the technology at the time that was doing the analysis. And so we're gathering all these data elements every 10 milliseconds of time. And that just proved to be a successful approach.
Wow, that's fantastic. So instead of kind of focusing on what is said, is saying, hey, wait a minute, let's take a look to how things are said. What are the voices? And that's what is there's a lot more information being carried when we speak, right? That's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a good analogy, Jeff likes to call the unspoken elements of speech the musical components of speech. And that led me to think of it as an orchestra. So imagine that our central nervous system and our brain control all of the instruments that create speech, if you will, the orchestra. So the tubas and the string section and everything else, the vocal cords, think of those as the string section. Think of the power at which our lungs expire, driving air through, the speed of that and the power of that through our vocal cords, how our tongue is moving. Think of that as maybe the percussion section, and or how our jaws are moving. All of these instruments are functioning in a coordinated manner, controlled by our central nervous system, the conductor, and yet it's all self-conscious. So you're also looking at a set of data that's very objective. It relates to the health of the central nervous system, and also what the central nervous system is communicating through speech, not only the formation of the words that are created, but also all the emotional components. And if you happen to have a progressive neurological disease, those instruments may not be functioning completely the same as they would if you didn't. And we can see that difference. Those subtleties can be recognized by machine learning and deep neural nets. So that's what we found. And we also found that those fundamental elements, vocal biomarkers, if you will, are universal. They're common across languages. So when I get excited, and you could tell I'm excited about what we do. I don't have to say that.
I'm getting excited too.
Yeah. And when we do, we get excited regardless of whether we're speaking Mandarin or we're speaking German or we're speaking French or English. And this musical element of speech is communicating that excitement. You know, someone yells a warning, and we know that's not the excitement about, you know, our football team scoring a goal, because that's a different sound than the excitement, although the same words may be uttered. We know that this is in, you know, a situation of danger versus a situation of celebration. And those different elements come through speech, even though the words being spoken or even the language being spoken may be different. And so we found that that was common. And that's important because we're trying to create a tool that's practical within the healthcare environment. So you didn't have to have a background message, or if you came in and you were speaking Spanish, you could still have an analysis done using our tool set if you were speaking English or Japanese, or if you're speaking British English, or if your English happened to be in Saudi Arabia and you were taught by a person from England. We could still do analysis on it. And so we do it in multiple languages today and have validated in different languages.
So when we speak, this orchestra basically, well, transmits certainly words, but hidden in the words, there are so many signals that tell how we are, how this neurological system, our brain is operating. So transmitted with that information is how we feel. Are we okay? Are we sad? Are we happy? All that is transmitted. And there are certainly folks that know perfectly how to read these messages, right? And you cracked the code on how to gather all that information from a sound that is, as you said, right, kind of produced by a whole bio orchestra, which is our bodies and our voices and our vocal. That's fascinating. So you
Yeah.
you use the word biomarker, which kind of intuitively I kind of get what you mean, but could you tell us what is for Canary speech? What is a biomarker?
So when we speak of biomarkers, we often think of genomic biomarkers. For instance, I have the alleles in my genome for green eyes. Actually, I have an odd set of alleles, and on some days my eyes are quite blue, and on other days they're very green.
Uh-huh.
And that's the known set of alleles that cause that. And um, a person who has that same set of alleles, whether their ancestry is from Ireland and they're living in the US, or their ancestry is from Germany and they're living in Wisconsin, they're
Hmm.
going to have the same color eyes that I do. And in fact, if they have those alleles, their eyes will change back and forth between green and blue.
Ah,
And it would not matter where they were born, where their ancestry was born. Those are biomarkers.
huh.
Um, Understandably, words are not. All you have to do is go to France
Yes,
and understand that there's an entirely different language. And
correct.
so but I can't I can't go to France and think, oh, English is the biomarker of languages. It's not.
Hmm.
Languages are different all around the world, and they're complex and they're wonderful and they express different things. There are certain words in certain cultures that don't exist in other ones because of their presence, and just culturally they've come to understand things. I'm told that there are certain words for certain colors that didn't come into existence until the 1800s.
Hmm.
I mean, isn't that spectacular? I mean, for
Yes.
the color blue or whatever it is, it's not blue
Mhm.
because we see the sky every day. But um, in the case of biomarkers, if the if the elements of speech which we use to recognize that a person has Alzheimer's disease are fundamentally the same features. We look at 2,548 different features or biomarkers in speech, and we
Okay.
do that in milliseconds. We have found that all 2,548 exist across all languages. Now,
Wow.
that may not, in my definition, which is if these 110 define the algorithm that identifies Alzheimer's disease, if I build and validate that Alzheimer's model in Japanese, is it the same 110? We have
That's
found we
fascinating.
have found that it is. So our
Wow.
algorithm in the English language, when we take it to Japan, we validate it there. When we built an algorithm for mild cognitive impairment, which is harder to measure and it's a precursor generally to a range of different cognitive illnesses. We built it in Japanese first. We brought it back to the US and validated it in the US market. And we found that these features were common across all languages. Now, that makes sense looking backwards because NLP, natural language processing, is using this feature set to identify what words are spoken. So even though it's creating a different end point, Russian, German, Mandarin, Egyptian, whatever,
Hmm.
Faz, it's starting with the same group. And the way we arrive at what words are spoken are the phonetic sounds of those words that come
Correct.
together as apple
Yep.
and in English. So, but those features within the languages were common across all languages, and very much so. And so there are slight differences and there are little nuances, but they don't affect the accuracy and the building of the algorithms we use for identifying different diseases. That's also important. if you're going to have a product that's going to deal with something that's a universal problem,
Mhm.
you want to find a universal tool. Now
Really?
that's true if you're measuring a biomarker or a chemical marker for elevated cholesterol, it's the same regardless of what
That's
group.
right.
And
That's right.
and so we needed to find that. When you were looking at words and the application of words to identify diseases, if you have, 800 different languages, you would, if you're going to do that approach,
Hmm.
not only do you need a data set of months long of talking, but you also needed to have a different model for every language you ever built. And it's just not
Correct.
practical. First off, you can't go to a clinic and say, well, here's the last 8 months of my speaking. Can you tell me what illness I might have? We just don't do that. So we're able, without a background, when a person walks into a clinic, we can measure where about a dozen different diseases are, whether they
Wow.
have Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, or they're anxious or they're depressed. And we're doing that in clinics today in different parts of the world.
That's amazing. Most
Mhm.
of the speech to text technologies try to find phonemes, right? That's the unit. The phoneme is the unit of the language, which basically eventually creates words and sentences and thoughts and all that. But hidden in these phonemes, there are this, you said 2,500 biomarkers. It's like a genetic code almost, right? That you're
It
able
really
to
is.
identify and say, here we go. We know that that person that is speaking might be having this condition.
Yeah. And we look at a 20 millisecond window with a 10 millisecond slide. In a
Wow.
minute, in a minute, because of how many different things we're looking at, we have 15.5 million data elements in a minute.
Wow.
The only the only piece of information that's denser than that with respect to the human body is the genome itself. And, and the two things have different realities. If I find a marker in the genome, I mean, there are simple markers like red hair. I had red hair all my life until I got older, and it turns more blondish and gray. But um, there are simple things. But if I have the markers for Huntington's disease,
Hmm.
it's a dominant gene. If I have them, I'm going to get Huntington's at some point in my life. It's predictive that it will happen, but not predictive that it exists. So I can't say that I have Huntington's today because I have the genes for Huntington's. I can say that I will get Huntington's. And we worked with the Harvard Beth Israel group where we built a speech model that looks at that question. When does a person go from a pre-manifest, they call it, to
Hmm.
manifest? When do they transition from not having the disease to having the disease? We're 98% accurate in identifying
Wow.
that
98%.
on 40 seconds of speech. While in a meeting
That's
like this.
amazing. Wow.
And in addition to that, since this is a neurology team that's looking at this patient and they're looking for cues, and frankly, they're listening to their voice too.
Yes.
We just have a tool that does that very, very accurately. So while we're doing that 40-second conversation, so this is all ambient listening, we're just
Hmm.
listening to conversation. While we do that, we also identify where their anxiety and depression levels are in that same 40 seconds. So a neurologist may not be thinking about their depression, and they within 3 seconds on their tablet, they see they have elevated anxiety or elevated depression or both, or they're
Wow.
normal. And they'll ask,
Yeah.
how are you doing? And the patient, depending on their age, if you're older like I am, you generally say, I'm doing fine, thank you. If you're a younger adolescent and you're coming home from soccer and you say, how was your day? The answer is, my day was fine, thank you. And as my daughter's walking away, I know it's not fun. So, that's the kind of value that this brings, and it does that in real time. So multiple illnesses, comorbidities, different diseases, are streaming to a tablet, giving information as a tool, giving
Mhm.
information to the clinician or to the nurse, to whoever the clinical team member is, allowing them not only to understand better and objectively the health of their patient, but also what's the next question I should ask? And
Oh,
we're hearing
wow.
back from clinicians all the time. We just had we're deployed in St. George, Utah, and there was an interaction between a doctor and one of the patients, and he said to them, he said, you know, how are you doing? How's your behavioral health? I mean, and this is a person that understands all of that. And they said, oh, I'm doing really fine. And he said, you know, from our conversation, the
Mhm.
indication I got back is that your anxiety is moderate and your depression levels are severe. And he said, all right, the truth is I've been on a depression medication that I just didn't feel was working for me anymore. I came off it about a month ago and I haven't stabilized. And he said, but I think I'm okay. And that led them to a discussion. There are different medications, possibly there are
Mhm.
non-medication ways of dealing with this. Maybe you need to give yourself a break, you know, twice a day, go out for a 15-minute walk, you know, whatever you need to do. Maybe you need to listen to music. Maybe you need to chill in the evening. Um,
Yes.
However it is you manage this, if it's not going to be through some medication that you've been on for 10 years, that's fine. You could transition. This transition can be managed
Hmm.
rather than, and you can be using our tool to see how you're doing. They could do this at home. They could do it
Wow.
on a smart device. This could be done literally anywhere in the world now. So
Wow.
that's the kind of benefit it brings to both the individual and to a clinical team member.
And it's all about data, right? Health is all about data and blood work and temperature and weight. And now what you are adding, if I understand all that correctly, is a whole different dimension of data, which is talk to me, talk to
Yeah.
me, and I'll there's so many data points or biomarkers that you're going to produce just by talking, and you crack the code of understanding all that. That's amazing.
Yeah,
So,
and it can be done, it can be done non-invasively. It can be
hmm,
part of the conversation. The subject matter is irrelevant. You could be talking about your son's soccer match. Um, Internationally, their
it could be
football
a
game.
chit chat conversation, and all these biomarkers are there anyways.
Yeah. And our APIs are intelligent enough that they're listening. And when they've acquired 40 seconds of the individual speech,
Hmm.
they then process that and return it within 3 seconds.
Wow.
And it's intelligent enough to understand who's the patient and who's the doctor. And we're functioning in a high trust environment, fully HIPAA compliant. So it just becomes like a companion to the clinical team member, providing
Yeah.
them information that's actionable. They can do something with that information.
Wow. And there are people that are good reading these things naturally, and I
Yeah.
guess some other people that are less sensible, or then they don't have the empathy, or who knows, they cannot read that all that, right? But you have, that's why I guess being an actor is so difficult, right? It's not about reading some lines, it's about reading the lines, pretending that you are feeling what the character is supposed to be feeling at that time. And I don't
Yes.
know how your technology works with actors, but I've seen machine learning models that try to detect emotion and whatnot, but they use actors, which I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't to me either. There was a paper that was published from a university where they hired Hollywood actors to come in and pretend they were anxious or pretend they were depressed.
Exactly.
We build everything that we do within the clinical environment, working with people whose job it is
Wow.
to measure that. And they're using current subjective tools to do that. We take those into account. And so we may have 4 different measurements on an individual, including a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And we take all of that information and provide that to the machine learning along with their voice. And from that, we identify the specific biomarkers that are related to it. For instance, in Huntington, in the example I gave, we found in the beginning of these 2,548 features that we look at in speech, biomarkers, 1,103 of them were different in the Huntington's patient than in a person without it. And about 700 of them were different in a patient that had the gene, but had not manifest yet. So there was, these markers are very, very sensitive. And even though the disease had not been recognized in the patient yet, there were markers that would identify it. Now, you don't need that. You can do a gene test, but it relates to how sensitive and how specific local biomarkers can be.
Absolutely. And the classic application is like, dude, you are lying to me, right? That's what
Like
about that? Is that something that you have worked? Is like, hey, you say something, but that's not, you know that that's not the truth. Have you experimented with that anyhow?
Yeah. So we don't, in a patient often, for a variety of reasons, they may not be fully aware of what their situation is. They may not particularly want to talk about it at the moment. They may be older, where if you ask them how they're doing, they're going to say, "Oh, I'm doing fine, thank you." I mean, that's a common answer. It just is, and I'm approaching that age rapidly. So I understand that. Even with the example I gave earlier, where the individual had come off their medication, they felt they were managing it. They didn't need to discuss it with the doctor. And and they just said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm doing really well," or I'm okay. And then the doctor said, "Well, what I'm seeing is, and that's the difference between a self-assessment, subjective piece of information and an objective piece of information based on biomarkers. If you take an X-ray of someone's arm and you can see a fracture in it, and they say, they may be the kind of person that just says, I'm fine. I mean, it's sore,
okay,
but I was working a lot yesterday and I'm fine. It's going to be fine. And he says, well, actually, fractures don't heal really well that way. So it may not be an intentional act of trying to deceive. It may be and it almost always is, I think I'm doing fine, and so I don't want to complain.
it's like,
And
okay, I'm okay considering the circumstances, right?
yeah, that my leg is broken. I'm really doing fine.
I'm fine. Just my arm is broken. That's amazing. Henry, could you share with our audience some specific success story where Canary speech has been used?
Sure. One of the things that we have done is to be able not only to, as we talked about, to identify specific conditions that may not be the focus of the clinical involvement at the moment, like for instance, elevated anxiety or depression in a Huntington's patient or a Parkinson's patient. The focus is to deal with their Parkinson's or their Huntington's disease, but allowing them to recognizing that they may need to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist wasn't being evaluated. Now, that information can be provided without impacting on the amount of time or any tests that a person's taking, because it's all being done passively, what we call ambient listening now. It's all being done during that listening process, and that information is being offered up. If the clinical team member who's trained to deal with this sees it and they're making a judgment call, it's a tool for them. They're making a judgment call. I think that's fine. And they're moving forward with their advice and the questions. In that particular case, it enhances their ability to deal more holistically or broadly with the patient's health. And that's so critical. If an individual has sustained periods of depression or anxiety, they may not be sleeping well. It impacts negatively on their immune system. It impacts on their general welfare and well-being. And dealing with it either through helping them engage more in self-help, listening to music, going for walks. I personally like to walk and run. That's what I do.
Yes.
But a lot of people like to listen to music and taking time for yourself, because self-healing is so critical and so important. Doing that before going to bed at night. All of those things can be enhanced by understanding where you are and engaging them and taking offline tests is sometimes difficult because the time with the doctor is relatively short. And the demands on both the patient and the doctor are significant. So if we can do that as just a normal process of the conversation, that's helpful. Another area that we have worked in is in doing population assessments for the purposes in some of the countries like in the UK and in Japan, where they have nationalized healthcare. They're trying to plan that healthcare resource requirement. And they'll call broad groups of individuals, millions of them. Well, in one case, they were asking them a set of 5 questions, a set of 5 question sets. So they had multiple questions per set. They were taking 20 minutes, 25 minutes to ask them all these questions. And but that was assessing the condition of the population on things like anxiety, depression, mild cognitive impairment, on fatigue and other issues. We were measuring all of those things in 40 seconds for them during the telephone call.
Wow.
It reduced the call by 20 minutes. They got to spend more time with the individual actually talking to them rather than taking them through the questions, like, Mary, answer these next 5 questions for me. And Mary would say, well, can you repeat that? Well, instead of doing that, they would just talk with Mary. And we gave them that information. And we did that. We're rolling that out, but we did a pilot on 5,000 individuals. And one population just finished a similar pilot in Europe, in the UK, actually, where we looked at a group of 5,000 individuals to assess cognitive health and behavioral health, in essence, anxiety, depression, mild cognitive impairment, and Alzheimer's disease, for the same reasons. And we were able, within 40 seconds, to qualify all 5,000 of them within, and return all of those scores in 3 seconds of time. Wow. So it just becomes much more effective. It's objective information rather than subjective, and it saves time. It allows them to translate the conversation from gathering data to engaging with the person.
Totally.
So,
and you are able to detect that over a telephone kind of quality call, because it's not like a real microphone, right? It's it's a very simplified signal, and yet these biomarkers are still there. That's amazing.
They are, and one of the things, because we have in our genome, if you will, we've built things like the Amazon Echo, and we understand building something from nothing. We understand how to create new technology. So when you're dealing with signals that come off of a smartphone, these are very, very, in all respects, very high quality signals. And I know we all have trouble when we don't have signal capability, but they're very high quality signals, and telephones vary, and they can vary. So we not only train our models against the features and biomarkers of that audio, but we also train our models against different characteristics of noise. So for instance, in the US, when we were getting ready to commercialize our anxiety and depression models, we actually hired independent organizations called CROs to collect data from all 50 US states. So we collected in excess of 5,000 participants in all 50 states. That gave us not just a whole range of different accents and different dialogues and everything else, which do not contribute to the specificity or accuracy of our models, nor do they hinder it. But from a science standpoint, you want to prove that. And then the other thing it did was these individuals were in different buildings, different rooms, different size rooms, different using Android or Apples or version 12s or version 15s or whatever it was. And we needed to feel comfortable that our algorithms had been tested and trained against those different non-specific,
I
but
guess.
very important elements. So we did that too. And that's what you do. In many, many ways, far-field speech, when it did not exist at all, the concept of how it would become, well, I happen to know the man who ran that team. So we
amazing.
That. Yeah, and we put that kind of science into what we did. And then we have a group of scientists from 4 different continents. Our scientists are from Europe, from Korea, from the US. We have scientists out of and contributors out of Australia. So we have people trained in different education programs, speaking different languages themselves, who understood and approach this problem in different ways. We have a gentleman from India working on our team, and from Germany working on our team, and from England working on our team, and Korea. So we decided intentionally that our doctorate, our PhD scientists would be a very diverse group of individuals with different experiences. So they weren't coming out of a kind of a brilliant graduate school program, but one, because there's tends to be kind of common thinking. And when you're trying to create something new, something that doesn't exist, quite frankly, having individuals that came out of Europe and came out of India and came out of Korea, it's
backgrounds and perspectives. That makes
it
a lot of
brings
sense.
much different perspectives. And so we did that intentionally. And quite frankly, I haven't mentioned, but we have 12 issued patents. We have patents in the EU, patents in Asia, patents in the US. Our approach was novel enough that of the 12 patents, one of the patent offices asked us to modify one of the claims in one of those patents.
Okay, because that's what they do, right?
That's what they do. And the rest of the claims were awarded.
It was just, wow. That's unheard. I mean, I think with this
it is unheard.
patent guys, there's a lot of back and forth, unless for my experience. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So we see now how, I don't know, these neural networks, right, can gather all that and make and filter all this information until they're able to get insights, right? And we see how the large language models today are powering, and they're doing amazing things. So the big question here for you, Henry, is what do you think the future of AI is going to bring us?
Well, you reminded me when you were talking about neural nets. We've talked mostly about an individual visiting either on a video conference or a telephone call or in an office using a smart device or tablet, having an analysis in real time while they're with their doctor. Imagine if the previous visit they had, or in a post-discharge scenario where they're visiting with them a couple of times a week for 3 months, like a post-cardiac patient. We gather significant amount of information at a sublanguage level, if you will. We create a neural network of information. Our most recent patent, which published this week, early this week, Tuesday, I got notification of it, is called paired neural nets, and in the identification of an analysis of disease. So imagine you're listening to an individual on a Monday, post-discharge cardiac patient, and the person who's calling them is listening for a range of different health conditions, including pulmonary sounds. They're watching for potentially a pulmonary tract infection that could be very dangerous for them. There are vocal pattern changes that are recognized to be indicative of a stroke or a heart disease that's going to happen in the next 72 hours. There are anxiety, depression things you want to watch for, fatigue elements you want to watch for. So a nurse calls them on a Tuesday and then calls them again on a Friday. And on Friday, they want to know, have they progressed positively? Are they improving, or are they stable, or are they diving?
Mhm.
Now, during that period of time, the nurse may have called 25 other people. So she's got the confusion of all those other voices.
Gonna be impossible for her to remember all that, right?
And what I like to say is our models are not good at that. They're perfect at it.
Ah,
And they're perfect
that's
at it
amazing.
because we've taken like a genetic profile, a voice profile of the individual on Monday. And in real time, we're comparing that profile for all of those different things for item to item. And we're calculating a delta and providing that clinical team member with, on any one of those items or all of them, we're providing them with a delta, alerting them, if you will, in real time. Their pulmonary sounds may need to be examined. And so they can talk with them about it. So where's the future going? Well, for our purposes with speech, we want to be able to provide healthcare regardless of where a person lives in the world. There should not be a reason that is dictated by the circumstances of their birth or the location of where they are, that they should not have access to well-trained individuals who care about them, who innately care about how they're doing. And we've done work in Belfast with population of people called border people. They're actually historically the gypsies.
Mhm.
10,000, a community of 10,000 people who never go to a hospital, but they all have cell phones. We were able to
Right.
connect them with Ulster Hospital. And so that allowed for these individuals, regardless of where they happen to be, they happen to have cell phones. And almost everybody does, even in some of the, south of the equator, where you have some populations that are disadvantaged in some ways. We do have the ability to get inexpensive communication devices,
That's
smartphones to them.
amazing.
And so we
That
want to see that
smartphone
happen.
transmits information about their health, no matter what they are, and is a device that virtually everybody has.
Yeah, and we're working with a group of individuals in Australia right now, agricultural workers, tens of thousands of them across the continent of Australia, and their healthcare, because they're out working in the distant lands
Yes.
without contact, and then there's traveling medical groups that get there once a month. But in between all of that time, they're collecting a history of themselves, and or if there's a situation, they can communicate with a medical group at a local centralized clinical center. And so we're beginning to roll that out. So I think healthcare is going to proceed in that way. We look at this as a platform of technology. We currently today have about 12 different diseases in the progressive neurological area, cognitive health, and behavioral health. In those three areas, we're adding MS and PTSD, MS to the progressive neurology area, and PTSD to the behavioral health model in the next few months. Both of those will come on board as validated and add to that group. These are going to expand. We're working with the CDC right now for childhood illnesses, things like autism and ADHD and other illnesses that could be, through vocal models, assessed at the primary care level, so we can identify them earlier. So there's a range of different things. I think we're going to see a growth of this. It becomes a tool, and it becomes a tool in the hand of an individual that helps guide their conversation. And because it can be done passively, in an ambient listening mode, it doesn't impact on the time they're spending with them, but frees up time to actually engage as one person to another.
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
Mhm.
That's fascinating, Henry. But also, I want to be respectful with your time because I know you are very busy. So, what would be the best way for our audience to contact you or Canary Speech?
So, if anyone wants to get a hold of me, I can be reached at henry@canaryspeech.com, www.canaryspeech.com. Also, you can jump on there. You can see what we're doing. There's always more things behind the curtain, which are kind of fun. And but they can send us a message there. We get messages from people around the world right now, and it's so much fun. We
Wow.
engage with a lot of different people. So we look forward to it. Anyone who would like to know, just henry@canaryspeech.com or jump on our website and drop us a note. And we answer all of them.
Amazing. All right. So again, Henry, thank you so much for being here. And
Yeah,
for
and
all you
same here.
guys, absolutely. It's been such a pleasure, and inspiring conversation. So for you guys listening here and the Torras AI audience, stay tuned. We're going to have many other conversations in the coming weeks. So see you later.